Funding for RedTail Revered is made possible by generous support from ASC, ensuring access to a relevant, sustainable cultural community for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg region.
And we caught hell.
A heavy burden was tested by demonstrating service, loyalty, and patriotism.
You have our folks in the military fighting as a way to demand full citizenship rights.
Acceptance was not a given for America's first black pilots.
They had to fight at every turn and make sure that, don't give up.
Skirmishes across the skies during World War II delivered a new reality.
Fire came up out of the floor. I got hit at treetop height.
That hit sent this pilot to a German Stalag.
They stepped in harm's way on behalf of our country and to defend our freedoms.
A nation's defense didn't end discrimination.
There was Jim Crow to the nth degree.
A hard lesson lived out by the underappreciated who gave so much.
I'm a survivor. Play the game. Survive.
The compelling narrative of American aviation begins with the Wright brothers, and in recent years have gone on to include those who fought for the right to fly. Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Crump. Hollywood and historians have gone the extra mile in finding the missing links, along with information that's fallen by the wayside. One such story involves the Tuskegee Airmen, and what you're about to see showcases the efforts of a pilot who went through the hardships on American soil and was later held as POW by the Germans. Life's sunset years have provided Alexander Jefferson with a platform to inspire others, because in many circles, he's regarded as a RedTail Revered.
We had to love this country because we had a feeling that this country was my country, didn't belong to anybody else.
Desire and devotion were collectively embodied by a dedicated group of American servicemen who faithfully served a country that didn't always treat them with dignity and respect. Answering a nation's call for defense against racism, fascism, and the threat of global control by the Axis powers in the 1940s, landed hundreds of men of color into classrooms and cockpits. Their fight to fly eventually placed these pilots onto a blatantly separate and less than level playing field.
And I became qualified to become a pilot, qualified for the Army Air Corps. I never realized that the United States lost 5,000 B-17s.
In his mid-90s, retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Jefferson is still standing among those who made up the so-called greatest generation. Admirers know him as Jeff. Like many peers of his color, he's mastered a series of unparalleled challenges and obstacles during World War II by fighting for freedom overseas while facing legalized discrimination on American soil.
Alexander's, he's a character all of his own, there's no doubt about it. Just being able to see and talk to him and hear the stories firsthand. I learned that to succeed,
Jeff's incredible stories and life experiences are similar to the nearly 1,000 pilots who debunked the deeply held notions of naysayers that tightly held on to their beliefs that African American men didn't possess the skills to soar in the skies. Succeeding at this task meant beating long-shot odds and overwhelming obstacles.
125 of us started. Only 25 men graduated 9 months later.
Imagine the internal strength you have to fight for a democracy that really doesn't want to fight for you.
When the surprise attack by Japan hit Pearl Harbor during December of 1941, it was the same year the very first group of Army Air Corps pilots started their studies at Alabama's historic Tuskegee University. Despite perceived progress, the U.S. military was in a quandary over where to assign the pioneering aviators. Extended training continued on the sidelines for individuals like the unit's first commander, Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr., who was in the initial class of cadets. After 4 years of being shunned, Davis became the first of his race to graduate from West Point in the 20th century. Like his father, he would retire from the military as a widely respected general.
He was a leader. To tell you the truth, he's like God to us.
More distinguished legends emerged out of this group, including airmen such as Charles Dryden, George Spanky Roberts, Herbert Carter, and Daniel Chappie James, to name just a few. James, like Davis, also achieved the rank of general.
Some men could not take the discipline.
Born in Detroit, discipline came easy for Alexander Jefferson, who earned his wings nearly 3 years after the start of World War II in September of 1944. It was a proud moment for both him and his family.
I became a pilot and a member of the 332nd Fighting Group.
Sparse coverage of the nation's newest breed of aviators eventually showed up on newsreels. While the war was underway in the 1940s, the government produced its own narrative, trumpeting the accomplishments of this new unit through a film production titled Wings for This Man. The voice tracks were read by Ronald Reagan.
It was never easy for these men. They were pioneers, and no pioneer has it easy.
Headlines detailing their efforts routinely appeared in African-American publications that covered the 332nd Fighter Group's evolution from its original 99th Pursuit Squadron. It was a groundbreaking period when Jeff was among the pilots back at the newly constructed base in Alabama who waited to get the call. Being summoned to serve overseas didn't always come with orders of urgency, and as the global conflict raged on, intense flight training continued at Tuskegee's Moulton Field.
I'm part of that legacy myself, having attended Tuskegee.
Like Alexander Jefferson, retired Air Force Major George Sledge received instruction for his first flights as an aviator at Moulton Field during the Vietnam War.
I'm standing on their shoulders now. A lot of them are gone.
Respect didn't always come easy for black troops in the Second World War. In many instances, African-American military units rarely crossed paths, and by design, the government intentionally left some outfits stateside, despite investing time, training, and costly resources. Members of the 555 Parachute Infantry Battalion, better known as the Triple Nickels, were relegated to a series of domestic assignments and never saw action overseas. That was also the case with the 477th Bombardment Group that trained at Tuskegee. Their talents, skills, and knowledge were put on the shelf.
You have to overcome it even in your own soul to tell yourself, yes, I can do this.
Relating to restrictive circumstances was part of an uncharted path for retired naval pilot Brenda Robinson. National publications like Jet Magazine trumpeted the fact that she earned her wings in the Navy during 1980 as the first African-American female pilot in this branch of the service.
It seems like there's too many writers or authors or even scientists trying their best to prove that the minorities were not up to the task.
For 8 years, from 1941 to 1949, unfailing loyalty was put to the test for the Tuskegee pilots despite barriers on the U.S. home front and unexpected challenges they faced overseas.
I came out in '44, relatively in the middle of the whole program.
Prior to setting foot on foreign soil, Lieutenant Jefferson would travel north to his home state of Michigan and train at Selfridge Air Force Base before coming south again and getting orders to leave the U.S. from South Carolina's low-country community of Walterboro. Blueprints from the base created in the 1940s detailed society's rules of enforced segregation that assigned and required black officers and pilots to reside in specially designed Jim Crow quarters.
I learned how to play the game. Play the game. In life, today, you play the game.
The Embassy, South Carolina still offers a small rail and whistle stop along the eastern seaboard for Amtrak. Situated 20 miles from the old Walterboro base, it was one of the last departure points before moving on to the European theater of change for members of the 332nd Fighter Group. Reflective flashbacks of past missions from previous decades have a way of feeding the soul.
It was exciting. I think about now, 5 or 6 hours of exciting flying that P-51 Mustang. the whole rigmarole, the whole routine was exciting. Our mission was to knock out radar stations on the coast of southern France.
RedTail P-51 Mustangs became the unit's best-known signature calling card. With his fellow pilots based in Ramitelli, Italy, Lieutenant Jefferson's 19th and final mission took him near the French town of Toulon.
We went in at 15,000 feet.
During the assignment, the formation of flyers in their P-51s faced an unexpected challenge.
I'm the last guy to cross the target, and they blew the heck out of it. Damn shell came up through the floor, went out through I saw a hole up there in the canopy.
Training back at Tuskegee prepared Jeff for this moment and perhaps saved his life.
Meanwhile, they tell you if you bail out, you're supposed to count 1, 2, 3, then you pull the D-ring because they're sitting on the parachute. It came out with me.
Making the unexpected transition from pilot to POW is spelled out in his memoirs titled RedTail Captured, RedTail Freed.
I saw the tail go by with all the fire. I looked down and see the trees. That's when I pulled the D-ring. And I looked at it and said, oh, heck. Boom. I arrived in southern France.
American soldiers held against their will in World War II easily displayed the frustration on their faces. These images were part of a German propaganda movie. Military historians point to the fact that black troops were rare finds. Being detained for 9 months made Jeff a minority within a minority.
I was in Stalag Luft 3. Stalag means camp. Luft, L-U-F-T, means air.
The POW experience, including Jeff's, are well documented and chronicled in Andersonville, Georgia, which is roughly 100 miles away from Tuskegee, Alabama. His compelling story is taken to heart here. Once a lockup for Union soldiers during the Civil War, this federal site is now the National Prisoner of War Museum, managed by the National Park Service. It pays tribute to those who were captured during America's battles.
The isolation, the confinement, there's a lot of factors there that are very common to the prisoner of war experience.
Everybody's got the same opportunity to be a good American, to be a good human, to be a good military man.
Retired Air Force Colonel Quincy Collins can relate. He was held in the same prison camp as Arizona Senator John McCain during the Vietnam War, and is among those praising the plight of Alexander Jefferson.
It was not fun, believe me, to be a black man and to be a POW, because you knew that they were going to use every leverage they could find to break you.
He had such a presence of mind that he made sure that he did the things he needed to do. But he was very, very fortunate.
Like Alexander Jefferson, retired airline pilot Carl Gamble also took fire from the enemy. However, he landed his flaming C-47D in a safe place during the Vietnam War. Years later, while flying for Piedmont Airlines, Gamble was hijacked to Cuba.
He was a determined guy. I mean, you know, you're in a prison camp. He was so big. And there were so many things you can do.
Strict limitations by the German forces were one thing, but more than 70 years later, Jeff remains perplexed by their level of pinpoint intelligence.
They had my Chadsey High School grades. Clark College in Atlanta, they had all my marks. Howard University in Washington, D.C. had all my marks.
Printed words clearly and plainly spell out the 9 months he spent as a POW. But stirring and very personal insights are revealed from the pictures he created in confinement.
That's the camp. Notice the barbed wire around the elk? That's the way it appeared to me.
Compelling sketched images also detail the risk and challenges of his last mission, conditions of very tight confines, and the mental escape of booze parties held in very close quarters.
You got raisins, sugar, potatoes, rice, and with American ingenuity, a little homebrew. What the alcohol content was, I have no idea. All I know, it was potent. If it were not for the Red Cross food parcels, we would have starved to death.
For American POWs, the Red Cross parcels sent from the States were a lifeline, and the box kits even contained paper and pencils for Jeff's artwork.
I can imagine him sketching and some of the guards looking over his shoulder.
Heroics exemplified by the groundbreaking pilots as part of artist Tommy Robinson's catalog. In sizing up Jeff's depictions, the painter imagines what he saw in his mind's eye while being held by the Germans.
I think he was a very disciplined person. And I know the Tuskegee Airmen themselves were disciplined people. They were the cream of the cream.
That artwork is, wow, that was skill. That was just not making yourself feel better. That was expressing yourself.
Holding on to these images presented a problem all its own. With the war coming to an end, many POWs were sent to other camps.
We were caught in the middle, and to prevent us from being recaptured by the Russians or by the Americans, or by the Russians, they shoved everybody into Stalag 7A near Munich. Train loads, walking, you name it.
Jeff was among those forced to march 80 kilometers and ride by rail to Stalag Luft 7A before being liberated by General George Patton's Third Army.
It was 20 below zero. It was colder than hell. But somebody said, some of the guys, they had drawn many of their memoirs on paper. And it was so cold, some of the guys took them out and burned them. But I brought mine home. I said, hell no, I'm not going to. All these pictures I drew, I brought them home. I brought them home.
Liberation from the Germans brought a new sense of freedom to thousands of POWs. But Jeff would see and experience more tests and hardships before tasting freedom. Aging black and white images detail the chilling and horrific impact of man's inhumanity emerging from the Holocaust. Jarring remnants of blatant hatred and carnage found inside of Nazi Germany death camps were witnessed by American POWs not long after their release.
4 or 5 miles before you got there, you could smell the smoke, the odor, and the odor of burning human flesh.
Putrid smells and horrific scenes from life in Germany decades later remain seared in Jeff's psyche. He absorbed and processed this kind of hardship and inhumane abuse firsthand.
So I saw Dachau. Think about it. Any pictures that you ever seen of Dachau, double it, triple it.
You can still today smell it. Somehow or other, I never accepted the possibility of dying.
Dr. Susan Spatz lived through and endured the heinous wrath of German rule and understands why these scenes for Jeff and many others were so hard to take. As a Holocaust survivor, the numbers on her left arm are worn as a descriptive badge of honor.
34042, and it's got a triangle underneath because it meant Jewish, because Jewish, see, only Jews could be put into the gas.
Remember now, no television, no Time magazine.
Being shut out from the news of the day and not knowing about this heinous environment hit many American servicemen like Alexander Jefferson cold.
We walked in the barracks, inside, dead people everywhere. Something. It's too much.
The cruelty, of man in history is just mind-boggling.
War affects people in different ways. No man can go to war and come back as the same person.
Processing such a brutal and blatant hardship was an unwritten requirement for some servicemen before coming back to familiar soil. Despite U.S. successes overseas, inequality remained a byproduct regardless of sacrifice.
He's a true American as far as I'm concerned.
Big-time celebrations marking victory against the Axis powers were carried out from city to city. New York Harbor offered cherished and memorable moments to thousands of returning troops. From the Statue of Liberty to the Manhattan skyline, the anticipation of coming home was building. A festive hero's welcome made for Hollywood greeted the servicemen. However, In the case of Alexander Jefferson and thousands who looked like him, arriving stateside served up a crude and cruel dose of 1945's American reality.
When I came off the boat, walked down the gangplank, a little white soldier says, whites to the right and the N-word to the left.
The country Jeff and so many others like him fought for and came home to was still governed in the grasp of Jim Crow rule.
Coming back home to racism, segregation, and discrimination.
Everyone feels better about themselves by keeping somebody else down, and it's, I don't understand it, and young people these days, they won't understand that.
I've often wondered how patient the returning black population was that they didn't revolt after they fought.
Even after coming home, the work of the servicemen was not finished because of the Double V campaign, victory at home and victory overseas. A symbolic victory came 2 years after the war ended in 1947. That's when President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981. In theory, it ended the in-your-face segregation practiced by the military.
If we're going overseas to fight racism, to fight Nazism, and overseas, why not at home?
Alexander Jefferson, distinguished warrior honoree, retired Lieutenant Colonel, Tuskegee Airmen.
In his hometown of Detroit and well beyond the state of Michigan, the retired airman continues to receive a rock star's welcome.
Thank you for joining us tonight to help us celebrate the 95-year-old, still going strong, Alexander Jefferson.
The endurance of this 95-year-old and his stellar accomplishments were gratefully acknowledged by the Urban League of Detroit as he was honored with the 2017 Distinguished Warrior Award. The retired Lieutenant Colonel's acceptance remarks focused on the impact made and incomparable legacy left behind by him and his fellow airmen.
Once you get in the game, you can change the game.
The game of life took on a different meaning following World War II. Jeff became a husband, father, as well as a respected educator in the Detroit school system. At air shows across the country, his personal message of change, along with the many served with, is acknowledged in a big way. This traveling Tuskegee Airmen exhibit crisscrosses America 9 months out of the year and is a vehicle to educate the public. The RedTail Squadron is a volunteer effort.
We just enjoy all of our time we have around any of the guys that are left.
Veterans from that era managed to draw strength from each other. Richard's Coffee Shop in Mooresville, North Carolina offers a reflective place and refuge for survivors of America's previous battles. Warbirds and planes of the past validate sacrifice and service. On one wall, the presence of these pioneers in the skies who trained in Alabama is duly noted. An image of their cherished P-51 Mustang bears the autographs of many surviving members, including Alexander Jefferson. A deep sense of respect comes from those with similar experiences, especially white bomber pilots who were protected by the black airmen.
The prayers went with us on every mission. And coming back, the thank you prayers were there too.
Public attention to such a distinguished unit comes through an increasing number of tributes. All 191 miles of Interstate 75 in the Commonwealth of Kentucky have been designated as the Tuskegee Airmen Memorial Trail. And along Interstate 95, visitors to Walterboro are encouraged to stop by the standing Tuskegee Airmen Memorial. Back in 1998, city leaders dedicated a park to the more than 500 black pilots who received their training in South Carolina's Low Country. Back at Moton Field, where the early days of flying began, the National Park Service has taken over the training site and turned it in to a very public shrine. Personal recollections are delivered here by Lieutenant Colonel Jefferson in his own words.
I never spoke to a German inside the camp because the senior American officer is the man who dealt with the Germans.
He's got to be up there. Got to be one of the greatest.
Greatness is also defined through his accounts on the printed page.
You see how he cares about the other Tuskegee Airmen. You also see how he cares about the other POWs.
For 30 years I've taught children how to play the game.
On the night his life and contributions were celebrated, a simple parting shot of less than 20 words offered meaningful perspective in his beloved hometown.
Thanks, folks. Life is great. All you got to do is survive. You'll make it.
Survival is an important subplot of his life. By the numbers, 66 Tuskegee Airmen were killed in combat, another 32 held as POWs, and in the case of Alexander Jefferson, his life demonstrates how a man can be shot out of the sky and get back up, and use his experiences to challenge others, to question how people are treated, both in and out of uniform. That's RedTail Revered from the Carolinas Aviation Museum in Charlotte. I'm Steve Crump. Thanks so much for joining us.